Welcome to this training on external audit best practices. Learn and discuss the best practices before, during, and after second and third party audits. Beyond the use of your internal audit program, which hopefully is effective at identifying issues within your company, external audits are also a very useful tool to determine your organization's level of compliance with the requirements falling under the scope of your various accreditations. Your success in regards to external audits is largely dependent on your attitude and approach to external audits. Poor preparation, poor communication, having a combative attitude are all examples and strong indicators that your audit is headed in the wrong direction. But if you'll take some time and learn and follow a few best practices, you can greatly improve the success and results of your external audits. Now, before I get into the meat of the best practices, I want to share with you my philosophy for auditing or external audits from my perspective as an auditor. Audits are as easy as pie, and I know that that's a corny acronym, but it really has a meaning when it comes to external audits. The P stands for procedures. And of course, by procedures, that's all of those items collectively, like procedures, work instructions, data cards, routers, travelers, op sheets, whatever the names for those types of documents are at your facility. All of those procedures must include, is what the I stands for, include all of the requirements flowed down to you from your customer. Now that might be on the purchase order, it might be on the blueprint, it might be on the heat treat spec or the material spec or some other procedure that they flow down to you. Any and all of the requirements, even if they are embedded in from one specification to another specification. For example, an AMS 2759/3 includes AMS 2759. 2759 relies upon ASTM E18 for Rockwell hardness. So you'll have to dig out all of those requirements and include them in the procedures collectively, all of those documents once again, that you have in your facility. Now, the final letter E stands for evidence, more specifically, objective evidence, to show compliance with all of the requirements that are flowed down to you from your customer. Of course, the procedures will have objective evidence that you have addressed those requirements, but we would also be looking for the evidence of the output of those procedures, like furnace charts or forms that get filled out, records that are retained from calibrations, those kinds of things. So when an external audit is conducted, if there are problems or nonconformances, I can guarantee you that each and every single one of them will come back to one or more pieces of this pie. Now, just for an example purposes, I will explain to you the chart that's at the right. I did an internal audit on myself regarding nonconformances that I had written over a period of time. And what I found was approximately 40% of the nonconformances that I had written had something to do with a procedure that was lacking, or something wasn't clearly defined, or it was overlooked. The second highest was actually the objective evidence. It was 35% of the nonconformances that I had written over that period of time. Things like forgetting to sign off on a particular document, quality missed a sign off, uh, or not finding a certificate of a thermocouple that was used, or a thermocouple that's in a furnace that has been there ever since the furnace was brand new and you've never changed it, but somehow you can't locate the document. That falls under the evidence category. Now, the least in terms of percentage, but still pretty high, 25% of the time, the nonconformances that I wrote was for a failure to include a requirement that was flowed down to the supplier from the customer, but somehow was overlooked or perhaps misinterpreted. I don't know how that happens with how clear AMS 2750 is, right? But anyway, you get my point. If you fail to address a requirement, or you overlook or misinterpret a requirement that's flowed down to you, you'll likely have a nonconformance involved. Okay, now that we're on the same page, on with the best practices. Of course, before an external audit can take place, it has to be scheduled. So you'll have to contact the appropriate organization to schedule your audit. If it's a NADCAP audit, you'll do that through eAuditNet. If it's a quality systems audit, you'll probably be communicating with your certification body. In either case, you might want to take care of a couple of other items before you get your audit on the calendar. One of those items is to determine the scope of your audit. In other words, identifying and determining the range of activities and the period of time for the documented information that's going to be subject to examination. Additionally, you might think about the export control issues that your company has to deal with. This not only means the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, or ITAR, but also the Export Administration Regulations, or EAR. These items are different in the makeup. ITAR covers all defense articles and services, while EAR covers commercial and dual-use items and technologies. Where regulated items are listed, you can find ITAR covered items on the United States munitions list, right? While EAR items are listed on commercial control lists. You'll need to identify those issues and communicate them to the organization that's scheduling your audit, as well as to the auditor before, or at least as soon as, the auditor arrives at your facility. Now, speaking of the auditors, it's important that you understand that the different entities that are coming to audit you have auditors that have a very high level of two areas, experience and education. Doesn't necessarily mean they're the best personality, but they are experienced and they are educated. I can vouch for this by being a NADCAP auditor for over 10 years and also being an aerospace auditor to AS9100D. The process to become a NADCAP auditor is threefold. One, you apply at eAuditNet, and you have to go through a pretty rigorous written exam. If you do okay on the written exam, the next step is to have a one-on-one question and answer session with a staff engineer. And if that goes well, you'll get another teleconference with a minimum number, I think it's 6 members of the task group, whatever commodity it is that you want to become an auditor of, bombarding you with questions until they're comfortable that you have enough experience and education. Now, when it comes to aerospace quality systems, you not only have to have a certain number of hours of classroom training, but also a number of audit days where you've gone out and actually performed audits before getting your accreditation to become an aerospace auditor. and the requirements to become an experienced aerospace auditor are even higher. So keep that in mind when the auditor walks through the door. Now, before your external audit takes place, you will be required to perform internal audits. Why? Because they're required for quality management systems, and they're also required for NADCAP. More importantly, they are a sound piece of the puzzle in making your business continually improve. It's one of the key components of preparing for an external audit. In fact, your internal audit is the time where you want to find nonconformities or opportunities for improvement. It's the time for you to be the hardest on yourself before an external auditor comes in. So the first step is identifying any shortcomings in your quality management system or in your special process system for a NADCAP audit. It doesn't stop there. Once you have identified nonconformities or opportunities for improvement, it's time to perform corrective, in the case of a nonconformance, or preventative actions resulting from the identification of whatever the issue happened to be. Most companies will do this. When I come in for my external audit, I review their internal audits, and I can see that they identified a few things perhaps, and that they actually performed some corrective actions. However, the last item on the list is one that I find suppliers often overlook, and that is to follow up. It's great that you said you were going to revise the procedure. And yes, someone sat down with the document and hashed out the new verbiage or added a paragraph or made the necessary changes. But I come in and review the same information, and while I find that you did it, you never implemented that newest revision into the system. Now, if this were an answer to a NADCAP finding, a staff engineer would be asking you to supply training records showing that you put this into your system, that you actually made that procedure effective. Another reason to follow up is to ensure that whatever you identified as the corrective or preventive actions actually worked. It could be that there is another contributing cause that you missed when you identified the root cause. Maybe there's another line that leads to the same condition. If you don't follow up and you don't test the corrective actions to ensure that the nonconformity has been removed from your system, then you're opening up yourself to get a nonconformance during the external audit. So do your due diligence when it comes to your internal audits. Prepare for them, perform the internal audits, be hard on yourself, identify. That's the free pass, if you will. That's the time you want to identify shortcomings of the company. Perform corrective and preventive action on anything that you find, and don't forget to follow up. Also keep in mind, whether it's an internal audit or an external audit, this is not a headhunting expedition. You're not looking for shortcomings of individuals. Audits are not about the people. Audits are about the systems, processes, procedures, and records that you have in place for people to be successful. If you communicate that well across your organization, Individuals won't be afraid of internal or external audits. Their hands won't be shaking when I go out on the plant floor to question them. If you express that we're not looking to get someone fired or get someone in trouble, we're looking to make an assessment of the systems we have in place and make them better for you, the employee, you'll be farther ahead in the long run. What are the best practices for you to have during the audit? Well, from the time the auditor arrives at your facility, certainly hospitality is key to setting a welcoming environment for the auditor. There's no special requirements when it comes to hospitality, but little things like making sure the auditor knows where the restroom is, perhaps where the coffee maker is, or if you have water somewhere. Those that go a long way for hospitality with your auditor. I talk more about this in the presentation of the auditor-auditee relationship. But here, just know that hospitality is an important part of a best practice during the audit. The second item on the list, the audit sequence, is ultimately important to keep the audit on track. You need to take a look at the auditor's agenda, not only at the beginning, but each day, so that you know how to best plan for what the auditor has laid out for the sequence of the audit. Ensure that personnel necessary to answer questions are actually present. They didn't leave early that day because they had a doctor's appointment or whatever. I can remember an audit where the quality manager led me out to the metrology lab to talk about some pyrometry items, and the pyrometry guy was already gone for the day. That kind of stuff takes the audit off track. If you try to stay a step ahead of the auditor on the agenda, you will be far better off. Now, a big part of external audits are process audits. Auditing the process of, if it's an ADCAP audit, the special process that you're performing. If it's a quality management system audit, it's all of your identified processes on your interaction of processes that you submit before the quality auditor even arrives. If it's an ADCAP audit, for example, a heat treat audit, there are a certain number of job audits that must be completed. Prepare for these job audits. Don't over-prepare. Remember, the auditor has to select the jobs to be audited. The auditor is not allowed, or at least not supposed to, take jobs that you have already, quote-unquote, pre-screened and use them as a part of an ADCAP audit. They are supposed to pick from what available jobs there are for both in-process audits and historical audits. And finally, during the audit, you're working on this together. Even though the auditor is there to audit you, hopefully they don't have a God complex. They're not any higher level than you are. You have every right to be informed. So if you feel like you're missing something, or you're unclear about something that the auditor has done, is doing, or is about to do, ask them, talk to them, get the information. Now, hopefully the auditor is giving you this information freely, but if they're not, you might have to have a conversation with the auditor to ensure that you are informed throughout the audit. What you never want to have happen is get to the end of the audit thinking everything is fine, only to find out that it's not. So plan for that. Discuss each day with the auditor what's going on, what they've seen, if there are any issues, talk about those things. Now, NADCAP auditors are supposed to arrange for an end-of-the-day review every single day. If they don't, ask for one. You have every right to be informed. Yay, your audit's over! Don't get too excited. You got a few NCRs. So in reality, now the real work is just beginning. This is no different than if you had identified nonconformities internally. The expectation of the NADCAP program and also aerospace quality management systems is that you have a fully developed and effective root cause corrective action process through which you can identify root causes and fix problems. NADCAP will take it a step farther and has a requirement for certain criteria during the responses to nonconformances. Now, before I get to that, let me give you an example of a poorly drafted response to a nonconformance. So a nonconformity might say, the procedure for instrument calibration did not clearly flow down the requirements for the accuracy of said instrument. So the first response from the supplier for their identification of the root cause says, the root cause was that the procedure for instrument calibration did not correctly identify the accuracy for the instrument under calibration. What? That's exactly what the nonconformance was. Maybe 2 or 3 words changed. That will never be accepted by NADCAP or quality management system audits. In fact, NADCAP requires certain criteria to be met when responding to nonconformances. The first of which is to identify the immediate corrective action. So in this case, what was the immediate corrective action? That might be the fact that you revised the procedure to put the correct accuracy requirements into it to be flowed down. That might stop the bleeding, but there's more to it. Now you really have to go dig deeper into the problem to find the root cause. What's the root cause? It's that cause that by definition, if you fix it, the problem goes away for good. Now, in our example, you have to start with the problem. And NADCAP, I'll tell you up front, likes the 5 why tool in root cause corrective actions. Now, if you go on Google and Google root cause corrective action tools, you'll get a boatload in your responses. One of them is the 5 why process. What you could do, if you want to appease NADCAP, is to state the nonconformance as a question. The procedure for instrument calibration did not clearly define the accuracy requirements for a particular instrument. Why not? End it with a why. Answer that question. The answer to that question may be something simple. It mistakenly got removed in the previous revision. Or it could be the person who wrote that procedure didn't know what they were doing. And you go question by question. If your answer is that the person who wrote that procedure was not adequately trained to write that procedure, then you have to again ask why. Did your system not define education requirements or training requirements for the person who's writing procedures? If so, why not? So you keep going with that chain until you have identified the root cause. Again, The root cause is the one that once you fix it, the problem goes away for good. Now, once you identify the root cause, NADCAP also requires you to have a statement on potential product impact. Is there any product that was affected by the nonconformity? Now, if the calibrations had been done correctly and it was just the procedure that didn't state what the requirements for the accuracy were to be, then there probably isn't any product impact. It might be a no-brainer, but NADCAP won't accept and won't close a nonconformance if you don't answer with a statement that says, hey, we reviewed, for example, hey, we reviewed all of the last 6 months worth or years worth of calibrations for that instrument and found that the results were always acceptable. Shame on us for not flowing down the accuracy requirements correctly, but there were no product impact because the instrument was actually as accurate as it was supposed to be. Once you have addressed potential product impact, then it's time for you to identify what your corrective actions are. Now, that could be revising the procedure. Now, if you revise a procedure, what usually follows? Training all the necessary personnel on the changes that you made to that procedure. It could also include training the person who wrote the procedure that missed it in the first place. Or it could be altering another procedure about writing procedures. It could call for a secondary review, something of that nature. Whatever the corrective actions are, they need to be identified and listed in your corrective actions. Now, if it's NADCAP, they require objective evidence of each corrective action. So don't submit corrective actions, identify corrective actions, without submitting objective evidence that they have been implemented. Now, NADCAP will give you a break for things like if you had to purchase a piece of equipment and there's a 6-week lag time or 6-month lag time before that piece of equipment can be delivered, they'll accept the purchase order. Or even if you're going to send somebody to a PRI training, for example, they'll accept the fact that you've enrolled in that training. They won't make you have to go to that training before they close the nonconformance, but you'll have to show objective evidence for each one of the nonconformances, and that, I'm sorry, not each one of the nonconformances, but each one of the corrective actions that you have taken. And you're going to have an effectivity date of when that corrective action was implemented. Now, that's different from the effectiveness. NADCAP doesn't require you to show the effectiveness prior to closing the NCR. But it's every bit as important that you follow up on those corrective actions that you implemented to ensure that it actually fixed the problem. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a supplier and reviewed nonconformances from their previous audit, only to find that they never went back and followed up and found that they actually have the same problem going on that they did during their last audit. So not only is it a nonconformance again, but it's one of the non-sustaining corrective action type of nonconformances, which for NADCAP means 2 major nonconformances. One for the repeat finding. Even if it was a minor last time, it's going to be a major nonconformance this time. and a free additional nonconformance, major nonconformance, against the quality management system for not having fixed that problem permanently. So those are the expectations for both NADCAP and aerospace quality management systems when you have findings that need to be corrected. You can see why at the beginning of this slide I said that perhaps your audit is over, which is a good thing. You can be happy about it, but the real hard work is just beginning. It often takes much more effort to answer nonconformances, implement corrective actions, get them closed, and follow up for effectiveness. It's far more involved than it is to just go through the audit. So please heed my advice and make sure that your root cause corrective action system is working effectively. It will help you to maintain a good track record and have a successful external audit. Thank you for your participation in this presentation. I look forward to hearing from you. If you have any additional questions or would like to contact me, you can use any of the methods up there on the screen. Thank you and have a good day.